I call the member for Dawson.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This motion notes the importance of investing in local communities to assist them in meeting future challenges and seizing future opportunities, and that's very commendable indeed. But the motion then goes on to talk about funding commitments under the Regional Development Australia Fund. What it does not mention is the term unfunded Labor election promises, which is exactly what these so-called Regional Development Australia funding commitments made during the election actually were. Now, with all due respect to the previous speaker, the member for Indi, the Regional Development Australia Fund was anything but well established and anything but respected into the community. In fact, both from my local RDA and from local councils, the response has been that it was chaotic, that it was inconsistent, that every round was different, and that councils and applicants simply did not know what the rules were when they were going to apply. So that was the experience of local organisations, local councils, and indeed the feedback from my local RDA. So I note the motion claims around 5 and 5B of the RDA fund were announced and budgeted. Well, it's half right. Projects were announced. They were announced during the middle of an election campaign. Along with making their various other announcements, Labor also tried to claim that these were not election promises and that the projects were, quote, already funded or already in the budget. For example, in my electorate, the Labor candidate issued a press release on August the 19th, 2013, 2 weeks after the election had been called, well and truly into caretaker mode, with this promise, quote, a re-elected Rudd Labor government will provide federal funding toward the upgrade of the Whitsunday Coast Airport, end quote. Labor's release then goes on to put a caveat on this $10 million promise, saying the federal government's commitment is contingent upon Whitsunday Regional Council providing the required additional funding. Well, the required additional funding, according to the original application, was a further $5 million. So not only was it an election promise, it was an election promise with a huge caveat, one that would have seen a $290 increase in rates bills across the Whitsundays. But wait, Labor's release then goes on to make this claim about their promise. The commitment would have been delivered through the government's Regional Development Australia Fund and is already included in the budget. Well, I looked through the budget for this and many other announcements, and they were not in the budget at all. There was no line item in the budget that announced $10 million for the Whitsunday Airport or any of the other programs funded or projects funded through the RDA. And there wasn't even a mention in a media release when it came out that these programs were going to be funded. Just like all of these Labor promises, no line items, no mention in the budget. And if those opposite were so convinced about funding these projects, then they would have made the deal earlier and they would have had it in the budget, or at least in a press release that came out when the budget was delivered only 3 months earlier. So what changed in those 3 months? Well, we had another sitting Labor Prime Minister knifed in the back. We had bad polling by the government at the time, bad enough to knife the Prime Minister and run around the country and make spur-of-the-minute election promises, trying to pass them off as already funded projects that were in the budget, but it just doesn't cut it, Madam Deputy Speaker, and neither did their promise to fund a library in the Northern Beaches of Mackay. It was another project that was contingent on funding from local government, I've got to say as well, but this so-called second coming of the Rudd government, they also promised funding for this Northern Beaches Library just 4 days before calling the election. Only 2 months earlier had they brought down their budget and it was not mentioned in it. It was not even mentioned in a press release emanating from the budget. It's quite clear that these were election commitments, and in fact I spoke to the Deputy Prime Minister about them. He told me the advice from the head of the department was that these were being treated by the department as election promises by the Labor Party. You cannot get more impartial advice than that, and that was the advice from the department. Now, I will be encouraging all of my local councils, and I would ask the mover of the motion and the member for Indi and all others to do that, to encourage their councils to reapply for these projects through a proper program which we will establish called Stronger Regions. It will be available in 2015, and it won't be some fairy tale pot of money that's linked to a mining tax. It's not actually raising anything. It will be a proper program, real funding, because that's what responsible governments do, that's what grown-up governments do. And what this motion comes down to is a scorned Labor Party upset because its election promises aren't being delivered by us on this side. Well, we wouldn't require them to deliver our election promises if they got elected, but they shouldn't require us to do it either.
Oh, sorry.